Snow White and Rose Red. The test of true prophecy is quite simple. If history bears out the events foretold, then the prophecy made is true and acceptable. All of the words of the prophets in the Bible have proven true, even to the events leading up to our modern times. Many of the perplexities that plague us today as a people, and many of our mistakes as well, would be eliminated if we would give our attention to the prophets of Israel. The theory that modern man may stand apart from the prophecies of the Bible is a tragic fallacy and an expensive one. Those who think they can read the scriptures and skip the words of the prophets are making the same mistakes which were made by the Pharisees of old. Much of the prophecy as given in the Bible is tersely expressed, and much of it is dressed in a symbology which veils its interpretation. This is due partly to the limitations of language. When a seer of Israel was given a vision of the future by God, there were no words to describe what he saw. Put yourself in the place of one of the ancient prophets. How would you describe to your fellows an airplane, a tank, a modern battleship, or an automobile? It would be more than difficult. It would be almost impossible. It was only natural that these men resorted to parables and the use of symbols to give their fellows an example of what was to come, of the things they had foreseen. Yet the remarkable fact is that they did choose symbols which would be easily recognizable by people of every language in every generation. They drew upon nature for their illustrations and often chose birds and animals for their characteristics of eagles, lions, leopard, and bears do not change and are well known by all classes of people. In the Saxon folk tales we have a wealth of corroborative material on Israel prophecy. Many details are supplied about events which are previewed in the Bible. These details are for our information. They speak of today. If, as a people, we do not get these meanings from these stories, then we are not accepting our heritage as Isaac's sons, Saxons, and profiting by them. Israel of old was led by chosen men of God. As a nation, her rulers were wont to listen to those holy men and to counsel with them on matters of national policy and decision. When it suited God's purposes, these men gave of their wisdom to rulers foreign to Israel, as witness the choice of Joseph by the Pharaoh of Egypt for his chief counselor, and the elevation of Daniel to a like position by the rulers of Babylon at a later date. Today, the United States and the other Western powers are in a dilemma. There is no Joseph or Daniel, and no Elijah, seemingly, to point the way for them in their contest with Russian communism. Yet the situation today needs a Daniel and an Elijah to lead us successfully out of our difficulties. But first we must, as a nation, come to a conscious realization that we are a part of Israel, that we are Manasseh, the second tribe of the house of Joseph, and we share with Ephraim, Great Britain, the birthright of Israel. Genesis chapter 48, verses 15 through 22. With this full acceptance of our birthright, we must pay heed to the words of the prophets of the Bible and recognize in communism an ancient enemy of Israel. As a nation, this enemy has appeared on the pages of history in many forms. It made its first appearance in the Bible in the valley of the wilderness of Sin as the Amalekites, the descendants of a grandson of Esau, who opposed the children of Israel in their march to the Promised Land. How Israel prevailed against this foe is the subject matter of chapter 17 of Exodus. As a result of this threat against the throne of Jehovah, the Lord said he would have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Exodus chapter 17, verse 16. As the birthright nations of Israel, the United States and Great Britain are blundering along today. They are embattled with the forces of atheistic communism, not recognizing their ancient enemy because they do not recognize themselves. Had the United States known this truth, do you think she would have been tricked in 1933 into the diplomatic recognition of the government of Soviet Russia? Do you think she would have allowed Russian embassies to be established in our country, each one of which has proven since to be a spy center? These and many subsequent blunders would have been avoided had she known the nature of her enemy. In our treatment of the story of Snow White and Rose Red, we shall look for the appearance of a new actor upon the stage of Saxon folklore, one that has not been dealt with as yet. The tale parallels the Bible, particularly the events of the 17th chapter of Exodus and the 38th and 39th chapters of Ezekiel, commonly called the Russian chapters of the Bible. In these chapters, America can be identified as the land of unwalled villages, them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Great Britain is described as the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof. These nations and others with them are pictured as asking of Gog of the land of Magog, Russia, Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey? Ezekiel chapter 38 verses 11 through 13. This manner of questioning implies a surprise attack. The two nations cannot conceive that this Russia, which up to a certain point had appeared friendly, will suddenly turn and attack them. This is exactly the picture we get of the bear in our story, as he pokes his nose through the door of the cottage, where Snow White and Rose Red live with their mother, snug against the winter cold. The bear appears friendly and wants only a place by the hearth where he can get warm. The two girls and their mother let him in, and later we see him coming and going like a pet. Does this not coincide with the relations of the United States and Great Britain with the Russian bear, especially from the year 1933 to the present time? The cottage, which the United States and Britain now share with the Russian bear, is shifted to our own shores, to New York, where at the present time the UN is housed. But we are getting ahead of our story. Let us start at the beginning. From the title, we can readily see that our story is related to the story of Snow White. Snow White, as the heroine in both stories, is Israel, but in the second story we are introduced to a sister, whose name is Rose Red. As the story opens, we get a picture of a poor widow who lived in a lonely cottage with her two daughters, Snow White and Rose Red. We are already acquainted with Snow White, but who is Rose Red? As we know, the name Snow White was derived from Isaiah, who in his first chapter described the state of purity and perfection to which Israel shall attain in the latter days. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18. In verse 8 of his opening chapter, Isaiah refers to a cottage to which the daughter of Israel shall flee for refuge. Describing the judgment of God on Israel and Palestine, he says, "Your country is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. Your land, strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate as overthrown by strangers." Isaiah chapter 1, verse 7. Then, using the symbology of our story, he says, "And the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage in a vineyard." Why should the daughter of Zion be left after the destruction of Jerusalem? This daughter of Zion can be none other than the tribes of Israel who wandered across the continent of Europe and built themselves small cottages in the faraway islands of Ireland and England. We therefore surmise that the story opens in England rather than in Palestine. We can also see that our story is a sequel to the story of Snow White, which began with the wanderings of the 10 tribes after they left Assyria. If we can identify the sister of Israel, we can perhaps pinpoint the date of the opening scene in history. The widow had 2 children who were like the 2 rose trees. One was named Snow White for the white roses on one tree, and the other Rose Red for the red roses that grew on the other tree. Reference to the rose tree here is very interesting, as we often speak of the family tree in arriving at the descent of a certain family down through the years. The mother of the 2 girls is the trunk of this family tree, so to speak, and again we recognize her as one of the daughters of Zedekiah. There is here an implication of royalty in regard to both of the sisters, since the royal line of the house of David was preserved through Zedekiah's daughter. We can thus identify Rose Red with the house of David and the house of Judah. Whereas, in the story of Hansel and Gretel, Israel and Judah were depicted as sister and brother. In the present instance, they become sisters. It was the marriage of this young lady of the Pharez side of Judah with a prince of the scarlet thread, i.e. of the Zerah branch of Judah, that solved the riddle of the 2 eagles, a riddle that had been given out by Ezekiel for Israel to solve. Ezekiel chapter 17. This was the means chosen by God to preserve the house of David in compliance with a promise he had made to Israel and which he was bound to keep. That the vast majority, even in England, are blind to the fact that the house of David is totally embodied in the present reigning house of England does not lessen its veracity or its importance. More exactly, history itself announces the presence of these 2 sisters in England. In a spirited contention of 2 of the leading houses of England for the throne, we learn of a war called the War of the Roses. This war broke out in 1455 and lasted to 1485. The 2 houses in contest were the House of York and the House of Lancaster. The symbol for the House of York was the white rose, and that for the House of Lancaster was the red rose. While these two reigning houses of Britain cannot represent Israel and Judah directly, yet the presence of these symbols of the roses in English history links our story with England very definitely. The clans of Judah, by the time they arrived in Britain, were known as the Jutes. The country took the name England from the Angles or Engles, who were of the tribe of Benjamin. Angelus is the word for messenger. It was the tribe of Benjamin that was singled out to carry the message of the gospel to the Gentiles, and while a small portion of the tribe returned to Jerusalem, a larger number migrated with Judah to England to give the name to that country which would later take the gospel to all parts of the world. England has indeed preached the gospel to all the Gentile world. History proclaims that the Saxons were not just one tribe, but rather a confederation of tribes. We know, of course, that other tribes of the House of Israel made their way to England's shores. This story is of interest to all because it contains an account of the guardian angel, an aspect so familiar in English art and literature. Once, when they, Snow White and Rose Red, had spent the night in the wood and the dawn had roused them, they saw a beautiful child in a shining white dress sitting near their bed. He got up and looked quite kindly at them, but said nothing and went away into the forest. And when they looked around they found that they had been sleeping quite close to a precipice, and would certainly have fallen into it in the darkness if they had gone only a few paces further. And their mother told them that it must have been the angel who watches over good children. While it is true that a particular office of the angelic host is the guardian of children, in this story and on a national scale, this angel is the same angel who watched over Israel in England and gave protection in one of her greatest hours of danger. In the 10th chapter of Revelation, this angel is announced as another mighty angel, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth. Revelation chapter 10, verses 1 through 3. When Elizabeth I took the English throne in 1558 AD, she had a difficult task before her. Being a Protestant, she re-established the Anglican Church which had been squashed by her predecessor, Mary Tudor, a Roman Catholic. In collusion with the Pope at Rome, King Philip of Spain tried by various means to recapture England for Roman Catholicism. Being rejected by Elizabeth as her suitor, he assembled the largest fleet ever built in the history of Spain and sailed out to take Elizabeth and England by force. The defeat of the Great Spanish Armada is one of the marvels of history, and Elizabeth was the first to acknowledge God's protection over England. The picture of this protecting angel having in his hand an open book, and a little book at that, indicated the printed Bible. Previous to the era of printing, the Bible had been copied by hand and was necessarily large and cumbersome. With the invention of printing, the Bible became a small book and was soon printed in great quantities. This bit of symbology bespeaks England's role in the spreading of the Word of God. With the efforts of John Wycliffe in the 13th century, England led the way in the translation of the Bible into the native tongue. By 1535, a complete translation was effected by Miles Coverdale, whose work was based partly on Wycliffe's and William Tyndale's translations. On the continent, the hunger for the Word spread, and Luther, Calvin, and others made translations of the Bible into German and French. The fire of religious fervor was caught up in the Great Reformation movement, which has since spread around the world. In our story, the experience with the guardian angel was followed by a picture of peaceful tranquility. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's little cottage so neat it was a pleasure to look inside it. In the summer, Rose Red took care of the house. In the winter, Snow White lit the fire and hung the kettle in the wrekin. The busy household activities of the two sisters suggest the busyness of England with building up her industries and her trade. She prospered under Elizabeth as she never had before. With the Bible being widely read, the ability of Israel to witness to God's blessings knew no bounds. The secret of this national affluence lay not only in the protection of the guardian angel, but also in the willingness of Israel to go forth and preach the gospel. The sun did not shine where you did not find Englishmen, and not only the colonist but the ship's captain too carried under his arm the little book, the Bible. The esteem with which the English people looked upon the Bible is reflected in subsequent passages. In the evening, when the snowflakes fell, the mother said, "Go, Snow White, bolt the door." and then they sat around the hearth, and the mother took her spectacles and read aloud out of a book, and the two girls listened as they sat and span. And close by them lay a lamb upon the floor, and behind them upon a perch sat a white dove, with its head hidden beneath its wings. Here in this passage we have the symbols of the Bible, of Jesus Christ, and of the Holy Ghost, working together as a leaven which was meant to spread through the whole loaf, i.e., the world. Here, coupled with the reading of the Bible, is the descent of the Holy Ghost and the Spirit of Jesus Christ upon the reader, filling him with a desire to live according to the will of God and to follow His commandments. There is hardly a more peaceful scene than this in all literature, nor one which venerates more the nurturing strength to be gained beside the English hearth. Then there was a disturbance, a knock upon the door, and, rose red, pushing back the bolt, met face to face a bear. The bear began to speak and said, "Do not be afraid. I will do you no harm. I am half frozen and only want to warm myself a little beside you." Here, for the first time, we are introduced to the symbol of the bear. If we comprehend the meaning of this symbol in all of its varied implications, we shall arrive at the meaning of a prophecy that will enlighten us on modern affairs. To begin with, let us search the Bible and see where we find the same symbol of a bear. In the 7th chapter of Daniel, the account is given of a dream Daniel had of 4 great beasts, diverse one from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings, and behold another beast, a second, like to a bear. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Daniel chapter 7 verses 4 through 7. We are apt to think of the beasts in Daniel's vision as a reiteration of the Babylonian succession of empires as given in the 2nd chapter of Daniel. To Nebuchadnezzar was given a preview of the 7 times of Gentile rule, beginning with his own kingship and continuing into Roman times and beyond. But the vision given to Daniel was an explanation of the forces at work inside of those kingdoms, which extended on beyond the Roman Empire to our own times. Even Daniel could not quite grasp the whole meaning of the vision, for he wrote, "As for me, my thoughts greatly upset me, and my face changed color, but I kept the matter in my mind." Daniel chapter 7 verse 28, Smith and Goodspeed translation. It appears plain that he could understand the nature of the first 3 beasts, but the 4th beast, which was diverse from all the others, greatly perplexed him. To compare the 4th beast with just the Roman Empire is to fall far short in our comprehension of the scope of the vision. Imperial Rome has long ceased to exist as such, and Papal Rome, as a political entity, has shrunk to the confines of the Vatican at Rome. Since we know that the Ancient of Days has not yet taken his place in judgment, as described in verse 18, we know that the ramifications of this mysterious kingdom exist in the world today, and shall answer to judgment in the days ahead. We cannot look for this beast of dreadful form, therefore, in any one nation today, but we shall discover it embodied in an international system of great power and influence, working through all nations without regard for boundaries or language. This was seen by Esdras in vision as an eagle. "And I saw that all things under heaven were subject unto her," the eagle, "and no man spake against her, no, not one creature upon earth." 2 Esdras chapter 11 verse 6. This description of the sway of the eagle defines the secretive absolutism which holds in silence those men in high authority who could speak out, but fear to do so. Millions today, even the educated and seemingly well-informed, live on in complete ignorance of this power gnawing at the vitals of their freedom. They little suspect the enslavement being planned for them. As foreseen by the prophet Esdras, those who see and know and could warn the innocent of these nefarious plans are strangely silent. Let us not confuse the symbols. The symbol of the bear represents but one of the several aspects of this hidden power in the world. Added to the rending power of the bear is the swiftness and cunning of the leopard, the strength and courage of the lion, all united and conjoined to make the 4th beast the most terrible and ominous of them all. The 4th beast runs rampant throughout the world today. His ugly body is sprawled across the globe. It is the same beast mentioned in Revelation, which is to be bound and thrown into the bottomless pit. This beast is best described as a cruel, insatiable money system. It includes the satanic device of usury, interest, whereby whole peoples are laden with debt, and the individual is almost completely occupied with keeping body and soul together and keeping a roof over his head. Answerable to this unseen power are the various governments of the world, and every senator, every representative, every member of parliament knows it, but will not admit it. Its plans are carefully laid and secret, but the effects are apparent and widespread. It plays one nation against another, like chessmen, in order to gain its ends. The nation which has so swiftly and recently emerged as a great world power is playing well the role of the bear. Her armies have taken Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, and half of Germany. By the swipes of the northern bear's paw, either by force or by treachery, Czechoslovakia, Romania, North Korea, Manchuria, Tibet, and a part of Indochina have been added to the list of satellites. Afghanistan is recently added to these. It is obvious to all who are watching and alert that Russia, in her quest for power, most nearly fits the description of the bear as a part of the subtle, sinister force abroad in the world today. Just as the enemy of Israel in her day of dispossession was Ashur, the same old enemy faces her today in new Occidental dress. For the Occidental spelling of the word Ashur betrays Israel's enemy today, Russia. Interject an I in the word Ashur in reverse and you have Russia. Using the cruel Asiatic methods of conquest, even to the annihilation of peoples by transporting them bodily to Siberia, we can see that Russia answers well to the symbolism of the bear. In our story, the mother had sympathy for the bear, and called to the two hidden children, "Come out! The bear will do you no harm. He means well." That the bear was cordially accepted by the mother is something of a mystery to us here, yet might it not allude to intermarriages in the house of David with the ruling houses of Europe and Russia? At one time the Tsar, the Emperor of Germany, and the King of England were all cousins. This would be on the positive side. It would allow for the attitude of the mother who wanted her children to associate with the bear. On the negative side, this cannot mean anything but the gradual acceptance and employment by Israel of the Babylonian system of money and credit. Usury, a practice which King Alfred had vigorously outlawed in his day out of respect for Israel law, was practiced more and more in England. The breaking of this law of God alone has been the cause of much of the tribulation and sorrow that has come upon the Israel people. Whether they are in ignorance of or have disdained their origin, the fact remains that the Israelites entered into a covenant with their God, and as long as they break his laws, there will be a penalty for them to pay. To continue with the story, the sister had 3 encounters with another strange creature, this time a dwarf with an old withered face and a snow-white beard a yard long. As they went to the forest for firewood, they came upon this dwarf, whose beard was caught in the crevice of a tree, and the little fellow was jumping backward and forward like a dog tied to a rope. Thinking what to do to free the dwarf, Rose Red pulled her scissors out of her pocket and cut off the end of his beard, causing the dwarf to rail at her for doing so. This part of the story coincides with that period in English history when Henry VIII broke off relations with the Pope of Rome and pocketed for himself all of the money that had been flowing toward Rome. It might well have been his boast that he bearded the Pope. Here, for the first time, we are introduced to a characterization of the Pope of Rome, and there is no mistaking him, for he carried a bag full of gold and precious stones. The Pope, as it were, got his beard caught in the crotch of a stout English oak. In getting free, he lost part of his beard. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 20, we can identify the Pope as a horn that came up among 10 horns, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. In our story also he has a definite role to play as it relates to Israel, and to the bear, as we shall see. The children came upon the dwarf a second time, and on this occasion he had gone fishing and got his beard caught in the fishing line and couldn't get loose. Just then a big fish bit, and the feeble creature had not the strength to pull it out. The fish kept the upper hand and pulled the dwarf toward him. Again the children rescued him. They tried to pull him loose, but without success. So once more they cut his beard, much to the anger of the dwarf. This fishing scene alludes to the attempt of the Pope to subject the English to Roman rule by inciting Philip of Spain in 1588 to build his armada and sail for England as aforementioned. However, as events proved out, the fish the Pope had on his hook was too big for him. In fact, this fish almost pulled him into the sea. The invincible armada suffered total defeat, and again England had bearded the Pope. The use of the symbols of water, a fishing line, a hook, and a fish clearly associate this passage with that period in English history. There was a third encounter with the dwarf, this time when the mother sent the children on an errand to the town to get needles and thread, and laces and ribbons. They had to cross a heath on the way to town, and there they spied a large eagle attempting to carry off the dwarf. The children, full of pity, at once took tight hold of the little man, and pulled against the eagle so long that at last he let his booty go. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from his first fright, he cried with his shrill voice, "Could you not have done it more carefully? You dragged at my brown coat so that it is all torn and full of holes, you helpless, clumsy creatures." Then he took up a sack full of precious stones and slipped away again into his hole. Here again we find a curious departure from the usual pattern of the Saxon folk tales. When in history did the English again come to grips with the Pope? It was not a direct contact. We will understand this if we identify the eagle which was attempting to carry off the dwarf. In 1796, a tide of war swept over Italy, and the French general, Napoleon Bonaparte, crossed the Alps and defeated the Austrians, who had control of most of Italy. Napoleon established there the Kingdom of Italy, with himself as king. With Rome in his hands, he took the Pope and threw him into prison. He claimed for himself the ancient powers of the Caesars. At his coronation, his scepter carried at its crest the golden figure of the Roman eagle. And, as King of Rome, he can clearly be identified with the eagle in our story. As a result of the battle at Waterloo in 1815, the English and the Prussians joined to crush Napoleon and break up his empire erected on the continent. The Papal States were returned to the Pope, who, though briefly deposed, was reinstated. But the prestige of the Roman Church, the temporal rule that had been accumulated by the Pope, was definitely affected. Indeed, the dwarf had had many holes torn in his clothes, and he was ready to crawl into his cave again and rest for a while. Thus we see what is so graphically enacted in fairy tale form in the saving of the dwarf, the Pope, from the talons of the eagle, Napoleon Bonaparte, as the eagle sought to carry him away, had the Pope deposed and thrown into prison. While England had no desire to rescue and reinstate the Pope, she had the effect of rescuing him when she sought to squelch the ambitions of the French dictator Napoleon at Waterloo. It is for this reason, possibly, that the dwarf felt no particular gratitude to Snow White and Rose Red for rescuing him, since he was rescued out of a sense of humanity by the two girls rather than for any other reason. As the children were crossing the heath on their way home, the final incident occurred. They surprised the dwarf, who emptied out his bag of precious stones in a clean spot, and had not thought that anyone would come so late. The evening sun shone upon the brilliant stones. They glittered and sparkled with all colors so beautifully that the children stood still and looked at them. "Why do you stand gaping there?" cried the dwarf, and his ashen gray face became copper red with rage. He was going on with his bad words when a loud growl was heard, and a black bear came trotting towards them out of the forest. The dwarf sprang up in fright, but he could not get to his cave, for the bear was already close. Then, in the dread of his heart, he cried, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare me! I will give you all my treasures. Look, the beautiful jewels lying there. Grant me my life. What do you want with such a slender little fellow as I? You would not feel me between your teeth. Come, take these two wicked girls. They are tender morsels for you, fat as quails. For mercy's sake, eat them." The bear took no heed of his words, but gave the wicked creature a single blow with his paw, and he did not move again. Needless to say, the above-quoted section of the story involves us in prophecy, as the story relates to historical trends and happenings of a future date. This enmity between the two aspects of Babylonian system symbolized by the dwarf and the bear points us to statements made in the 17th chapter of Revelation. "And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, mystery, Babylon, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled." Revelation chapter 17, verses 16 through 17. Certainly, the Pope at Rome and the entire Roman Catholic Church fiercely detest and fear the voracious Russian bear to the north. Russian communism is a growing menace in Italy, for it is realized that with one swat of his paw the bear could topple the Pope from his throne. However, as our story approaches its climax, we find the characterization of the specific aspect of the bear merging into the larger interpretation of the beast system and its political, economic, and ecclesiastical phases. In this respect, both the bear and the dwarf may be considered as in the category of Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. The heart of the system is its enormous wealth, and a very substantial contribution to this is made by the material assets of the Roman Church, which are beyond calculation. The bag of jewels was most appropriate to identify the dwarf in our story with the Pope, for no collection of jewels and fine vestments can compare with the accumulation within the vaults, the dwarf's hole, of the Vatican at the present time. In the relationship of the Vatican to the whole Babylonian system, its economic power is more vital to the system than its ecclesiastical power, regardless of the fact that this is also very great. Immediately after his final tussle with the dwarf, the two girls ran up to the bear, and when he came up to them his bearskin fell off, and he stood there a handsome prince, clothed all in gold. "I am a king's son," he said, "and I was bewitched by that wicked dwarf who stole all my treasures. I have had to run about the forest as a savage bear until I was freed by his death. Now he has got his well-deserved punishment." We become involved here in the highly meaningful complexity of this unique folk story, the interpretation of which is no less intricate than the symbology of the book of Revelation in the Scriptures. Undoubtedly, the author of the Saxon tale deliberately paralleled the scriptural method of employing figurative language to conceal and at the same time reveal a hidden meaning. However, we can get our bearings here by referring to the 18th chapter of Revelation, which deals with Babylon the Great. The shedding of the bearskin is simultaneous with the demise of the dwarf, and the exclamation in Revelation chapter 18 verses 16 through 17 is applicable here. "Alas, alas, that great city, Babylon the Great, that was clothed in fine linen, and purple, and scarlet, and decked with gold, and precious stones, and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught." By the handling of its characterizations, our story subtly suggests that a terrific blow will be struck at the foundation of Roman Catholic power, which lies partly in its economic power. But further than that, in striking that blow, the Babylonian system itself will be utterly destroyed, thus setting the world free from its slavery, just as the prince was released from the bearskin. The righteous system will then be revealed by the manifestation of the person of the prince, the king's son, who is Jesus Christ. The righteous system, in its governmental, economic, and religious aspects, does not emerge from the Babylonian system, however. The righteous system was given to Israel at the outset of their establishment as the kingdom of God on the earth at Mount Sinai. But in succeeding generations, especially after their gentilization following their captivities and dispersal among the nations and the rise to power of the Babylonian succession of empires, there was a fast-growing incrustation of Babylonian influences, which eventually overcoated their righteous laws with a hard shell of pagan practices, never ordained or approved by God. In the final struggle, the dwarf pleaded with the bear to spare his life and turn instead on the two girls. "Come, take these two wicked girls, they are tender morsels for you, fat as quails, for mercy's sake eat them." This depicts the last desperate attempt to engulf the nations of Israel in the final destruction of the wanton system. However, the restoration of Israel as a prince, ruling with God, is assured. This takes us back to the experience of Jacob at the brook Jabbok, when he wrestled with the angel in the night, and his name was changed to Israel. And he said, "Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed." Genesis chapter 32, verse 28. Added to this is the fact that the Prince of Peace himself shall intervene to save his people. We read in the story that Snow White was married to the prince, and Rose Red to his brother, and they divided between them the great treasure which the dwarf had gathered together in the cave. Compare the implications of the possession of the great treasure with the statement in Daniel chapter 7, verse 18. "But the saints of the Most High," resurrected and restored Israel, "shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever." Compare also the reign of the prince with the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ to take the throne of his kingdom. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Daniel chapter 7 verses 13 through 14. In the book of Revelation, the story ends on the same triumphal note, culminating in the marriage of the Lamb and his bride, even Israel. The great marriage day of the Lord is the grand finale of the Bible and an invitation to the supper with the bridegroom, which precedes the wedding ceremony itself, should be the aspiration of every Christian. The calling of the guest to the supper is still future, but who shall say how far future?